7. The Masvia called me into his office. The Reb wanted to meet with me, she said. The Reb met with all of the yeshiva students who were about to become Ba Mitzvah, he said. The Reb especially wanted to meet with me alone. He gave quiet and resonant emphasis to the word yeshidus, alone. A week before my meeting with the Reb, I began going to the office of the Masvia every day after school. We studied Torah and Hasidus. The Masvia was preparing me for my meeting with the Reb. We studied about 3 kinds of Jews in the world. The one who sins and has evil thoughts, whose efforts to live a good life are an endless struggle. Most of us are in that category, the Masvia said sadly. The Benoni, the one who acts, are without fault, but who cannot control his thinking. Very few achieve that high level, the Masvia said. And the tzaddik, a tzaddik, can only be born, the Masvia said. It is the greatest gift of the Ribbono Shel Olam. Yes, a tzaddik can only be born. Only tzaddikim had control over their hearts, the Masvia said, quoting the Midrash. We studied the meaning of the verse in Deuteronomy. But the thing is very near to you, in your mouth and in your heart, that you may do it. What does the word very come to teach us? That the person whose understanding is the knowledge of the Master of the universe is limited, who cannot comprehend greatness of the blessed without end, who cannot produce awe and love of God in his mind and understanding. Such a person can nevertheless come to fear and love God through the observance of all the commandments of the Torah, for the commandments are very near to all the Jews. We studied the meaning of the verse in Proverbs. The candle of God is the soul of man. The souls of Jews are like the flame of a candle, the Masvia said. The flame burns upward. It seeks to be parted from the wick in order to unite with its source above, in the universal element of fire. Similarly, the soul of the Jew yearns to separate itself and depart from the body in order to unite with the Master of the universe, even though this means that nothing will remain of its former nature as a distinct and separate entity. It is in the nature of the Jewish soul to desire this union with the being without end, unlike the souls of the Gentiles, which are derived from the other side and which strive to remain independent beings and entities. We studied about the Sitra Achra, the other side, the realm of darkness, and the evil gift given life by God, not out of his true desire, but in the manner of only one who reluctantly throws something over his shoulder to an enemy, thereby making it possible for God to punish the wicked who help the Sitra Achra and reward the righteous who subjugate it. I did not understand many of the things that we studied, especially his explanation of the verse in Proverbs and his account of the difference between Jewish and Gentile souls. But he was a patient teacher, and I enjoyed the hours I spent with him. I did not draw or paint that week. My father was home the January night of my meeting with the Reb. He said to me in Yiddish, as I was putting on my coat, "Remember with whom you will be speaking." He seemed tense and apprehensive. My mother looked proud. It was a cold night. I walked quickly along the parkway. A winter wind blew through the streets. I heard it in the bare trees overhead. The sky was clear and dark, jeweled with cold and distant stars. I came into the Ladover building and walked up the stairway to the second floor. I had been told to go to the room at the end of the corridor to my right. The corridor was carpeted. Bright lights burned inside of the ceiling fixtures. I came to the room and opened the door. It was a tall waiting room with white walls, a single window in the wall to my right, and a heavy wooden door in the wall across the window. There was a desk beneath the window and chairs along the walls. On the wall opposite the doorway where I stood was a framed photograph of the Reb, Rav Medal Dorochov sat behind the desk. He wore dark clothes and a tall, dark skull cap. He was the Reb's goodbye, the chief of staff, the one who arranged the Reb's meetings and could speak in the name of the Reb with the same authority as the Reb. The only other person in the room was a very tall, heavy-shouldered man in a dark winter coat with baggy brown trousers. His face was ruddy and deeply lined. He had a white walrus mustache and a thick shock of flowing white hair. His hands were huge and he wore a dark beret. He was writing in a small pad he held in his left hand. He glanced up at me as I entered, smiled vaguely, and resumed writing on the pad. I could not remember ever having seen him before. I went over to the desk. Rav Doroshov looked up at me. "Good evening, Asher Lev," he said in Yiddish. He had a deep nasal voice and a sharp gray eyes. He was in his late 40s, but his beard was coal black, and was the hair beneath the skull cap, as was the hair beneath the skull cap. "Your mother as well," I nodded. "You have no tongue?" he said, looking at me. I found my voice. "My mother as well, thank you," I spoke in Yiddish. Out of the corner of my eyes, I saw the man in the beret smile faintly. I could not tell if he was smiling over my lost voice or over something he had written on the pad. "Sit down," Rav Doroshov said. "The Reb will see you soon." I sat down 2 chairs to the right of the man in the beret. Rav Doroshov sat behind the desk reading sheets of paper filled with Hebrew or Yiddish typing. I sat very still in the chair. It was a hardwood chair with a straight back. The man next to me flipped on a page in his pad and continued writing. An aircraft passed overhead. The man shook his head, flipped another page, and went on writing. He held out the pad in his hand, close to his chest. I looked closely at the pad and saw he was not writing but drawing. I looked away and sat very still, facing the door set into the wall opposite the window and the desk. It was a heavy wooden door, stained walnut. Gentle arabesque of thin, dark metal played along its surface. Long triangular wedges of metal hinged the door to its frame. I felt eyes on my face. I felt them move across my chest. I kept staring at the door. I felt the eyes leave my face for a moment, then I felt them again. I glanced at the man in the beret. He looked back at me. He had pale blue eyes. He smiled vaguely through the thick walrus mustache, then looked down again at his pad. I glanced over at Rav Dorochov. He sat at his desk reading. The room was very still. The man in the beret flipped the page of his pad and went on drawing. The door opposite me opened soundlessly. A woman stepped nimbly into the room and closed the door behind her. She was tall and slim and well-dressed. She went quickly through the room and out the door. Rav Doroshov got up from behind the desk, motioned me to follow him, crossed the room, and opened the heavy wooden door. He stepped back and waved me across the threshold. The door closed soundlessly behind me. The room was very large. It contained a single glass enclosed bookcase, a large walnut-stained desk, and 3 chairs near the desk. The walls were white and bare. The desk was bare. Lights burned in a small glass chandelier overhead. A tall Gothic window, its uppermost section open, took up much of the wall to the left of the desk. Behind the desk sat the Reb. He wore a dark kaftan and an ordinary dark hat. A dark cord girdled the kaftan. His face was pale. He seemed more a presence than a man. "Asher Lev," he said, raising his hand slightly, then letting it rest again on his desk. "Sit down, Asher Lev," he spoke in Yiddish. His voice was soft. "How is your mother?" I started to respond. I felt the words deep in my throat. I could not get the words out of my throat. I swallowed hard and took a deep breath. I saw the Reb looking at me. "Thank you, Reb," I heard myself say in Yiddish. "My mother as well." I was sitting in one of the chairs near the desk, but could not remember how I had got there. "Asher Lev," the Reb said softly. "I wanted to see you and to give you my blessings for your bat mitzvah." "Well, thank you, Reb." Asher, the Reb said. How are you feeling? I am well, Reb. I remember when you were born. I remember... Hi!
Thanks, Rachel, for having us.
Oh, thank you.